Welcome to the Flute NI. Join me, Aisling Agnew, as we explore the unique world of the flute in Northern Ireland. World-renowned players, teachers and makers from a wide variety of musical backgrounds share their experiences and expertise. This episode features International Soloist Eimear McGeown. Eimear performs on both classical and Irish flute. I started off by asking her what made her choose to learn the flute.
So I started when I was 7. I'd heard the flute on the radio in the car, and then a few nights later I was in bed, my mom came down and told me to come up and watch TV because James Galway was on there, and so said to me, "Is that definitely what you want to learn?" And I said, "Yeah, for sure." And then when I was 7 also, you made some people when you're kids, you make this thing called Holy Communion, and you get some like money gifts from relatives. So I used my money to give my parents to buy my first flute when I was 7. So that was classical. And then Irish flute. I started the Irish whistle when I was 8, and we were just outside in our front garden area, and my parents came and said, "We're going to Katie." And we were like, "Who's Katie?" And then Katie was actually a place in Armagh. And then we went down, and it was like a kind of community sort of club, and there was like loads of people and kids like just learning lessons. It was quite social and casual, and it was just like a nice environment. And my parents said, "Do you want to keep going? Do you want to come back?" And so we were like, "Yeah, sounds good." So my sister played fiddle because she already played classical violin. My brother started mandolin and then went on to play banjo, and then I started on the timissel. And then I did a bit of Irish music on the classical flute until eventually I was able to get an Irish flute. I think that was when I was 9 or 10. I started playing on the Irish flute.
You said about James Galway, who your mum had got you to listen to. Would you say he was a particular inspiration whenever you were growing up playing the flute?
Definitely. So I went to watch a concert. He was playing in, I think, the Ulster Hall. And I was just blown away by it. Like, I was just like this little girl at the back of the hall just going like, wow. Like, I remember it. For some reason, we were in the very, very back seats. I think maybe it was sold out, or we just got last minute tickets or something. But I remember sitting at literally very, very, very back row and being so far away, but still being able to see, and was just so exciting to even see like a hall like that full. Or I think it was the Ulster Hall, but like he was just so successful at the time, and like he was all over, I remember he was on Sesame Street. He was all on the TV. He was a big like character and profile at that time, that even like if you knew nothing about classical music, pretty much everyone knew who James Galway was. So that's, I think he did a lot for the flute, and I think he really made it, I guess, cool and made people want to learn. So yeah, I think he was huge inspiration for young people to learn.
Obviously that was your early inspiration, but what do you find inspires you now, like to practice or to learn or to perform?
At the moment, I do think that I want my career to go in a new direction in terms of the thing that I feel most connected to is film music and that sort of style of music. Just, I really love playing like stuff that's emotionally deep, and I find that film music is particularly like that, whether it's like, it's always like it could be really romantic, or it could be really like passionate, or it could be really like dark or really sad or really happy, and it's always kind of quite extreme. I really love connecting with audiences, and I find that like film music tends to connect with the most of the audience, because it's not really necessarily like, it's not like you think, oh, it's classical or it's Irish or it's world music or it's whatever, but film music can be anything. It can be all different styles. The thing I love most about the opportunities I've had are the variety, and I think that's what keeps me fresh or keeps me interested. The mixture of things I've been doing, I guess, are either classical concertos, the orchestra, Irish pieces that I've written with orchestra, or different ensembles and things. I think I want to keep all that still going, but just try and focus more on kind of just stretching things a bit further.
Highlights of your career. What have been your favourite concerts that you've done?
BBC Last Night of the Proms was definitely a highlight, but it was terrifying at the same time because I was still quite young, and it was high pressure because it was live, going out live. So it's, it's a big event to feel like you need to make sure you do a really good job. So it was definitely a highlight, but I was probably, I wouldn't say the most enjoyable thing, because I was like just thinking I need to make sure that I do the best job I can, and there was a lot of pressure under that one. One of my favourite concerts probably was playing, so I play my Irish compositions with orchestra with Camarade Ireland, quite a few places now, and I always just love standing there. So there's a piece I wrote called Inish, and every time I play that with the orchestra, I particularly enjoy that. It's just really, because I feel like comfortable, because I guess I composed it, so I feel like, already comfortable. I really love playing it because it makes me feel really connected, and then to have a full orchestra behind me is always a special thing, because it's not very often you get to do that, and somebody else arranged it for me, so like I could never have done that myself. So whenever I get the opportunity to play with an orchestra, I love that. So I played in the Kennedy Center in Washington DC, and that one in particular, I really was like, that was definitely a highlight, where I was like enjoying myself on stage, and it was like I felt lucky to be playing somewhere like that.
CV, but you would sort of say, actually, this was quite an important learning curve for me?
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't put it on my CV, but I remember when I was just coming out of being a student, I auditioned for an orchestra called South Bank Sinfonia, and it was quite an intense audition process, and I got down to the last two players and then didn't get it, and I was so gutted. Like, I was like distraught, because it was like, you just finished, it would have given you a year of some sort of salary and some sort of experience, and I was just absolutely devastated. But now, I mean, I actually do not enjoy, and I don't think I'm built to be in an orchestra. I just don't think it suits me and my playing, etc. And so actually, looking back, I'm like, that was great that happened, because it wasn't the direction that my career was supposed to go in anyway. Or I feel, so at the time I was completely devastated, and then I actually realised, do you know what, it was the best thing that had happened. So yeah, looking back, that's definitely a thing.
Okay.
Another thing I just want to add, I had this image in my head I remember playing. So my teacher at the time at Trinity, Trinity College of Music in London, was Wissam Bustani, and he would always be getting you to improvise in pieces and stuff, because he was very he liked to make sure you get inside a piece and etc. And I remember playing a piece in a church in Greenwich, and I can't remember exactly what the piece was, but I remember like I did it by memory and I got a little bit lost, so I just made up stuff and nobody knew, and thankfully I had a great pianist who Michael McGill at the time, and he was like just following me and he was great and everything. But I remember it thinking, do you know what, like sometimes you think, oh no, this is the worst thing that could ever happen, but actually you find a way to just keep going, and it doesn't have to be perfect, as long as you do a good performance and enjoy it and the audience enjoy it, and you just get on with it and find a way. Like, I think we're stronger than we think, and musically, you know, it's still creative, it's still an interesting piece, and as long as the composer doesn't hear it, then nobody else will know.
Sometimes the great fear in especially classical music is that you'll set a note wrong and it feels like the worst thing that could possibly happen.
Yeah.
And I think until you've played by memory and you've had an experience like that, you kind of learn actually that's
not the worst
really
thing in the world. Yeah.
The crucial thing of what you're doing.
Yeah.
So it does give you a greater perspective, I think, on the whole thing.
Yeah, because if you play something like note perfect and you're so worried about everything being exactly perfect or whatever, you lose the magic. You know, you may as well be listening to a recording that's, you know, just been recorded a million times to make sure the perfection's there. And live, you want to see something that's real. Like, we're human. Like, and it's better to really go for something and really give it your all, and then maybe slightly, you know, it's not perfect, than to be cautious and playing everything really carefully and then it's perfect, but actually people in the audience don't connect with it, because it's like you haven't even really been performing, because you've just been worrying and and thinking, and you're not actually like letting go and just going for it. So yeah, I definitely agree with that.
Do you think playing by memory is something that's quite rewarding for you, and that's something that's important to you?
I really think it's so important. I love that I was encouraged to do that. Like, I think the first person who encouraged me was a lady called Elizabeth Becker. She's from Ballinhinch. She was very supportive of young musicians at the time, and she made me do my first concert in Armagh without music, just before I went off to music college, and it was terrifying, but I managed to do it. And then I went off to music college and thankfully got with Bustani, who was very much into memorizing. So I am so grateful to that, because I think that when you memorize it, you take away that block between you and the audience without even because you've no stand in front of you, so that's already one thing. And then you get to know the piece inside out, because you're not even you learn it in a different way, like, and then you can connect in a different way. And even with Irish music, like, that's how we learnt music. Well, we learnt music by ear, but we always played things by memory, and there's just a different like way. Like, once it gets into your memory, then you can definitely perform it in a different way. And yeah, I just really, really, really encourage anyone to do it by memory if they can.
Yeah.
And actually, this is kind of going off on a tangent a little bit, but it's linked. The Irish music, we would learn mainly by ear. So then it would be in your memory. And then, like, for example, I didn't play Irish music for a long time when I went to London. And then I started playing again. Tunes that I'd learnt when I was a kid were still in my memory, because you learnt them by ear, and they're kind of stored in a different way. So when I was like a few years ago, I decided to learn a second movement of a Vivaldi concerto by ear, just as a test, because I decided that rather than learn it with the sheet music first and then memorising afterwards, I wanted to see what would happen if I learnt it just by ear, because you can't really do that with the first or third movement because they're so difficult. Yeah. But the second movement, you know, slow, and it's a bit like it's an error in some ways. So I noticed definitely that I played it differently, because I was like kind of like comfortable in a different way with it, because it wasn't off the music and then doing it. So I kind of felt like I interpreted better, like I would a slower, for example, from the Irish flute. And then also memory, it was so different. I didn't have any memory sort of panics, because it was learnt by listening as opposed to by reading. Yeah. So there's something to be said for that as well, but unfortunately it's impossible in classical music to do that for everything.
opposed to memorising for certain people is just the time it takes to do it. And I also just think that that's one of the great things about it, because I think that, like you said, you get really inside it, it's much more in depth, and I think flute players can be sometimes a bit impatient because we can sight read really well.
Yeah.
It's a great instrument for reading, and you don't have to look at your hands when you're playing, so you just read through things and you play quite quickly. And I think a lot of us, stop at that point when we've done something which is like good enough. And I think the process of memorisation takes you so far beyond that. So then you really actually do learn it by heart, which is a nice kind of turn of phrase as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I totally agree with that.
If you had to program like a straight ahead classical flute program, what kind of things would you do?
Definitely Hypnosis by Ian Clark. It's my favourite all-time classical flute piece ever. Like, I love it so much, so definitely that one. On a kind of simpler level, Home Away from Home, it would be my favourite sort of encore or last piece. I love that one. There was a piece, Simon Sonata. I did it for my 4th year end of degree, and it was a great piece, so I would do that again. On Fire by Dave Heath. I love that piece. Out of the Cool was quite nice, that jazz one by Dave Heath. I quite like that one. Lieberman, absolutely love Lieberman. Oh, love his stuff. So Sonata. Frank Sonata I really like, but it's just not the same as on the Fit violin. But I love, that's a really cool piece. Mel Bunny Sonata, quite like that. Elegy by Boehm, quite like that piece as well.
Would you say that London has a big enough Irish music scene that you can be still meeting different musicians and playing a lot there?
I think it's actually quite a small world over there, because a lot of people, we hang out a lot together. So before COVID, so I would have run before COVID 5 sessions a week. There'd be a lot of other sessions going on as well, but we'd all kind of take it in turns, and I'd book different people for different things, or we'd go around to different sessions and we'd all connect together. We'd all kind of gravitate towards each other. But I definitely find myself in the last few years, I've been playing with a fiddle player called James Cardy, and he taught me a lot, because he would constantly send me recordings and of people doing different styles and different types of pieces, and kind of stretched my whole sort of traditional Irish repertoire quite a lot.
So you must also like it when you get back to Ireland to play sessions and in places here, like if you're in the west of Ireland, where your sister lives, for example, do you get to play music there sometimes?
Yeah, actually for her wedding we had a big massive session, and yeah, you're right. It's really nice hearing different styles of music as well. So in the west of Ireland, in Connemara, they have a particular style, and it's really, really nice hearing those play live actually, and very different to London. And then my old teacher, Seamus Tansey, he's from Sligo. I would often play tunes. He would come to the house when I'm home, and we'd have tunes together, and it would kind of bring me back to my roots in some ways, because he taught me. So we'd play all the old tunes together.
I was just thinking about gigs that I've turned up to do with you in the past, and there's this massive collection of instruments on the stage, and they're tumbling out of your bag. Can you just tell me what flutes you play on and what instruments that you have?
Okay, it's constantly getting expanded. It's actually kind of scary how many I have now. It's just over the years you just keep building it up. But my classical flute is an Arista. with a Haynes head joint, and the Haynes head joint is auramite, so it's got a bit of gold and silver in the tube. Then on Irish, I have a Martin Doyle a rosewood flute in D with keys. Then I have a Martin Doyle blackwood flute in C. Then I have an E flat Irish flute by a flute maker called Lejeune. He's from Belgium. And I have a B flat flute made by Michael Grinter from Australia. And then I also have a D flute with keys made by Michael Grinter as well. So I have a lot of Irish flutes now at the moment. Yeah. And then I have a lot of whistles. So I've got a chieftain whistle. I've got 2 Goldie whistles. He's from, I think he's in Germany. They're fantastic whistles. And then I have a Sint D whistle, which is from America. And then I have another couple of low whistles as well.
Okay. And you must know quite a bit about different types of flutes, because obviously like you worked in All Flutes Plus when you were a student in London.
Yeah.
And that must have helped you just build an awareness of all the different types of makers and things that there were out there.
Yeah, no, the All Flutes Plus was brilliant because the thing I learned most from them was how unique every player is and how unique every flute is, and how like you'd get some teachers that would tell their kids, their pupils, to come in and buy a certain flute. And I used to always be a bit like reluctant for that, because every player has such a different I mean, look, even the shape of your mouth is different, your embouchure, all that, and like you'd have somebody come in and try a Sankyo, a Muramatsu and a Miyazawa, for example, and every single person, it's different. It's such a unique thing. And like even within the shop, the people who worked there all played flute as well. Like we had all like different flutes. So some flute would come in and I'd be like, oh my god, this flute's amazing, and somebody else would play it and they wouldn't enjoy it as much as say another one that they really enjoyed, and then I wouldn't enjoy it. So the thing I learned most about flutes was to make sure that you have to try it yourself and not be too influenced by someone else's opinion.
I think sometimes students can be a bit daunted by how many types of flutes there are.
Yeah.
Obviously flutes can be like really costly as well, like compared to other instruments. They can be pretty expensive, but it's also kind of like exciting that there are so many different great makes. And do you know, one of the things I really love is the fact that you can play on flutes that are made of different materials. There's not many instruments that you can play and you have like a silver one or a gold one or a wooden one, and it totally changes the sound.
Yeah. And actually, you've just made a good point there as well. Actually, it can be quite daunting for some pupils, and then maybe that's where the guidance comes in helpful with the teacher, because if someone's coming in and they're like, and often people would come in and they'd be like, they'd want your advice and they'd say, can you come and listen to me and tell me which one? And I think that's actually really helpful too, because as a player, it's sometimes hard. You might be like, oh, I really get on with this one, but you also want to know how it sounds to somebody else. So it isn't simple, right? It's actually can be quite complicated. But the thing I found anyway with my classical flutes was I fell in love with both of them. So my first one was first one as a like, so I had a Armstrong, then a Yamaha, and then I had a Willie Simmons head joint on my Yamaha. But then I had to get a better instrument when I was studying at music college, and I tried loads, and then I tried a Sankyo Artist, and I was like, oh my god. In fact, my friend Alicia had it and I was like, wow, this is unreal. And then I just fell in love with it, and I was like, I have to have that flute. So I had to try and get funding to get it. And then the same thing happened with my Arista. I just fell in love with it. I was like, wow. And I think that's often the case. You know, you try loads and there's loads of great flutes, as you say, but there always seems to be one that you connect with, and then it's like, that's it, that's the one.
So would you say, since you already have the flute, like the one that you've connected with,
that
you've got flutes that do like everything that you want to do?
For my classical flute, yes, 100%. My classical one I'm so happy with, and I would never change that. And it was funny because there was always temptations coming into the flute shop when I was younger, and it was like, oh, and you always thought you wanted the next best thing. But I've made peace now. My classical one I'm happy with. I don't want anything else. The only thing I would say with my Irish ones is that I constantly keep, you know, slightly changing my views, because I think like with my classical flutes, they were the ones I fell in love with, and I was like, wow. But Irish flutes are harder because you often don't get opportunities to test out loads of stuff, because there's not loads of stuff to test out, because the makers make them and usually are in demand. So sometimes you have to order it 2 years in advance. So you can't try it and then be like, oh, I like that one. So unless this happens to be a secondhand one someone's, you know, got, and then you try it and you're like, oh wow. It's definitely a harder situation with Irish flutes. So like even like I tried someone's Irish flute and I was like, oh wow, that's so much better than my old one. And then I think when I got mine made and it came along, it was different because especially wooden flutes, they're so unique, aren't they? And I mean, even classical ones are too, the silver ones, but I think the Irish ones in particular, like everyone's so different. Like it's not, you can't even go, I love that one, can I order that? And it's the same, it's going to be different. So I think my Irish flute world will always keep probably evolving, yeah.
Because you do play Irish music and classical music, and like I think obviously that comes across as really rewarding to you as a musician, and it's something you're like you seem to really enjoy and you're really good at. But has that ever caused more difficulty than rewards?
Well, so it's funny, when I was funnily enough, it was the same lady who told me to learn piano. She said to my mum that I shouldn't play Irish music because it would Irish flute, because she said it would be a problem for my future career. And I'm not even sure exactly what she meant by that, but for whatever reason, she thought it would be it would make my classical flute playing worse, or my profile. I don't know what it was, but either way, thankfully my parents said no. If she enjoys it, we're letting her do it. You know, it's her decision. And then the funny thing is, like, if I hadn't have done both from a young age, I think my career wouldn't be what it is today, because I think it's really difficult. It's hard to make a career as a classical soloist. It's hard to make an Irish flute player. And the thing that I guess love doing most is mixing the two together. So if I hadn't kept both going, I probably wouldn't have the same opportunities, and I wouldn't be enjoying my career as much as I am, because I love getting the opportunity to either mix the two together, or like, I remember when I was younger, when I was doing classical recitals, but I'd say I just bring my Irish flute and play a few tunes as well, because I thought, well, why not? You know, the audiences might enjoy it, and they always did. But the funny part was they always focused so much on my Irish tunes, and they were like, oh my God, that slower was so beautiful, and I love that reel. And then I'd be like, what about like the R's and R's and R's? I spent learning and memorizing the concerto or the sonata, you know, which took a lot more time. The Irish stuff, you know, is a lot more simple, less time consuming, let's say, to learn. So it was quite interesting in that way, you know, to getting that feedback. But I don't think they've been a problem with each other. And in some ways, like, I guess the Irish flute, you have to put a lot more air into. So it's kind of helped my classical flute, like, say, the length of time I can play notes without having to take breaths. Like, some people think, oh, wow, you look so tiny, your lungs must be small. But I think the Irish flute, then they're like, how come you're not needing to breathe much? And I think it's because the Irish flute helped my breathing on my classical flute. So that's one advantage. I just see them as two different instruments in some way, because I learned both so young. They've definitely helped each other in ways more than they've been a hindrance.
The breath control, like, I noticed even playing gigs with you, how good yours is in terms of like being able to keep playing for such a long time. And I think that's something the classical flute doesn't have as much of, because you often have rests in between things, you know. Even in solo concertos you have like,
that's a good point, yeah, little
breaks, but when you're playing Irish music, quite often there's a lot of repetition, so something might look like a short tune, but like you play it a few times in a row and you go straight into the next tune, and like before you know it, you're playing for I don't know how many minutes without hardly a break at all, and every breath you take is really snatched, you know. It's really kind of, you just grab it and you go, and that's something that's a lot more demanding. You never get that really sort of comfortable, big, luxurious classical breath. You know?
That's a really good point. Yeah.
Are there any parts of the music industry that you don't enjoy?
I don't know if this is exactly the question you're asking, but I find that the worst thing that people can do is compare themselves to each other, and that would be one thing that when I was in orchestra or studying, or, you know, like youth orchestra, I felt like people were being compared, and I didn't like that. Like even like say youth orchestra, we had a friend who would try and like what me and another girl, we were both really good friends, and with this other person who used to try and kind of put us against each other, and I never let anyone do that. I'm always really careful to do that, to make sure that doesn't happen, because, and I've actually got loads of like really good flute player friends like you yourself and Catherine and stuff, and I think this thing is so important, is that we all have different things to offer, and we're all so unique, and like every single person in the world is different and unique, so it's everyone's on their own journey, and I think that's the one thing I do worry about in the classical world, because Irish world, it isn't so much, because I guess maybe it's more people who are doing it for amateur or hobby or for fun, so they're less competitive. But I just always find the classical world, people got compared, and then there'd be a lot of like insecurity because of that, and it's not helpful, because it's important to support others and beef up everyone's tires, because it's already a difficult enough career and life, you know. I think it's important to not have that. So that would be the only thing that I would kind of not worry about, but I think can be often sad or difficult for people. I think anywhere you go in the world, if anyone knows you're Irish, they'll say James Galway. So I think it's brilliant that he's inspired so many young kids all over the world, but especially in Northern Ireland. Like we talked about this before, there's so many fantastic flute players come from Ireland and either left or are still there. And I think like that has to be down to him. Like, or maybe it's not just that, but maybe there's some sort of like thing with Irish players that seem to connect with the flute. I don't know. But there's definitely like anytime you go anywhere like in the world, it's always like, oh, you're from Ireland. You know, what about James Galway? You know, so I think there's maybe some link there. Especially with the Irish music, like Irish traditional music, for example, it's just all over the world. Everyone has heard it. Anywhere you go, like there's always Irish communities everywhere, and there's usually a session in a bar somewhere. In fact, that's what I always try and do. Like everywhere I go, like I went to Japan, I found an Irish session. I went to San Francisco, went to New York, I went to Australia. Everywhere I go, always find a session.
You've been living in London since you were a student, but you do actually get back to play in Northern Ireland quite a bit, and you've played quite a lot with Camerad Ireland and Barry Douglas. Is that something that you find really, you know, rewarding? Is not just the fact that, you know, you're playing these great concerts with fantastic musicians, but you're getting to come back to home to do it as well?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the nicest things is always playing at home, and actually the last night of the proms was in Titanic's in Belfast, in that centre, or just outside it, and I remember just being like, when you come home and play to your home audience, like that's just always it's such a special thing to be able to do, because you've gone away to study, and then, you know, you get to travel all the different places, which is great, but when you come home and get to share everything with the people who the place you're from, and even like the people that you kind of grew up, or like even maybe your family or parents, getting to see you play and grow throughout the years, and like come home and do that, it's probably one of the nicest things to do, really, because when you go abroad, like nobody in that audience knows you personally, whereas when you play at home, you're playing to people who actually personally know you, and there's definitely a different feeling when you get to do that.
Thank you to Eimear for all her wonderful insights. Next time on the Flute NI, renowned teacher and performer Colin Irvine will be sharing his stories.